2, a 3. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I ever get back. Oh, it's root for the Cubbies. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. Hey!
This is
the Monday Morning Quarterback on the 19th of August, 2018. Boston Red here in the Jerry Pippin Memorial Broadcast Booth. A very interesting quarterback. We'll attempt to quarterback a number of national, international events. We'll start with China, protests over the weekend there by protesters over the future governance, we'll call it, of Hong Kong, which is part of China, across the bridge, so to speak. Little different rules of engagement in Hong Kong than the rest of China, as far as certain privileges, liberties, etc. are executed. The development, however, is the situation is further internationalized now by the Trump administration stating that linkage between events in Hong Kong would be, or would weigh, I guess is a better term, on the ongoing trade negotiation over tariffs. Now, this is a very important development in that it directly links the U.S. government or American government and the foreign policy, Wilsonian foreign policy, with the economic well-being of both nations. Now, the tariff regime itself is a form, and it always has been. They go back in the U.S., a history of tariffs that have been around a very, very long time. But of recent consequence, I say of recent consequence, back to the 20s and 30s, we had the smooth tariffs that many historians, economic historians and historians, link to the Great Depression. And what happened with the Great Depression is a very interesting situation within itself. So we now see that situation occurring, and we have to think about what is happening with it and how it affects the future economic development between the two nations, being with the People's Republic of China and the U.S. Thus, the economy is tied to it, and generally speaking, it is not a good idea to tie economic policy to events that occur in other countries. Now, yes, we've seen a lot of sanctions, and this is one form of economic violence. We see that with Cuba, with Iran, with Venezuela, etc. And in the case of Venezuela, it has been very penetrating. Cuba has been going on since the 60s, and Iran has had sanctions since the Carter administration in 1989. Very, very long time. So it is mixed there. But what happens in 2019, events move much, much faster than they did 30 years ago or whatever, or into the 60s in the case of Cuba. But China is a very, very large nation, and it is part of a global economy, whereas Cuba and Venezuela, I guess it could be argued, are part of the global economy, but their positions are not at the front of the line, so to speak. Whereas China is up there, and not only China, over 1 billion people, 2.2 or whatever it is these days, but its economic importance and its integration into the world as such is very, very important. They have economic relations globally, from the emerging nations of Africa to Asia to the Americas, and of course into the EU. And now we see clearly what the whole operation was behind Huawei. Huawei is a very large technical company and located in China, and they make various types of products, smartphones, IT products, etc., and they are at the forefront of what is called 5G networks there. So again, and in various other types of technology. Thus, we now have this interconnection, and we'll see where it goes in terms of where the economy is. We'll get into a little bit from the Washington Post on possibilities of downturns tied to the punitive actions taken against China. We at this mic see it as one source, but only a secondary situation. Then we have Brexit. We'll talk about Brexit and the memo published by the, I believe, the Times of London, called under the plan Yellowhammer. The Prime Minister, or I should say the government of the Prime Minister Johnson, has basically said it was an older memo. But what it talks about is foodstuffs, a shortage of foodstuffs because of Brexit will break off transportation routes, and also there is a situation with certain medical supplies, etc. So it will have effects on the UK economy directly. Thus, that is another situation that contributes to what is the global position in a slowdown in the U.S. Now, politically speaking, this is not the time to necessarily have the slowdown. You'd want to have a slowdown occur next year in July or June or what have you, going into the 2020 elections. Now, obviously, slowdowns or recessions depend upon the severity. Now, of course, a severe recession would last the rest of Q1 and Q4 into Q3, Q2, etc. of next year. So those are things that are in, as they say, the crystal ball at this point in time. However, in the community, consensus community amongst economists, it went from roughly some saying 10% to 30% to some saying 40%. On our our program on the Numbers Man channel, which is macroeconomics, we've been talking about this for a very, very long time, but being very cautious about it. We don't like to note that a downturn is occurring, even if we know it is coming very soon, because we're not into spooking people, so to speak. So we've spent more time working on Brexit and less time on tariffs. Enough of that. A nationalized issue, there's several of those occurring out here. There is a news conference later today in St. Paul, Minnesota, and you'll have at the news conference Representative Tlaib of Detroit and Representative Omar of Minnesota. They'll be talking about the travel ban, the reaction from the Israeli government in Tel Aviv, and those effects, and they'll have other people there. We'll report on that at a later broadcast. Now on to Portland, Oregon, another national story that went international, and a number of groups there will go to the Oregonian, and we'll look at what happened in Portland over the weekend. And it is a sordid story that by a right-wing group called the Proud Boys. Now, the Proud Boys, and there were a number of groups there. One has to understand, these groups are a coalition, it's an old term, of right-wing groups. Many of the people wearing Make America Great Again, Trump 2020 red hats. Very interesting they chose the term red. Nonetheless, let's go to the Portland Oregonian. That is the newspaper in Portland. The Oregonian, I should say, is the newspaper in Portland, Oregon. It was on the 17th of August. This was posted, what would it be, roughly 2 days ago. And nonetheless, the headline is Portland protest, 13 arrested as police declare civil disturbance. Right-wing activists and those protesting their presence converged Saturday on downtown Portland's waterfront, a much anticipated confrontation that captivated a nation inflamed by rising divisions and resentment with even President Trump entering the fray. He did some tweeting. Police mostly succeeded in separating the demonstrators on opposite ends of the ideological spectrum. Members of the group Proud Boys and counter demonstrations arrived at Tom McCall's waterfront park. The Proud Boys gathered to condemn self-described anti-fascist activists, or anti-fascists. They're not self-described, they are. And this is one thing you really watch out for, how Antifa, as they're called, there's rumblings on the right trying to declare them terrorists as opposed to the Proud Boys. Now, they believe and espouse racist and bigoted views. These are the Proud Boys who have a large presence in Portland. The group traded shouts of USA, go home, Nazis. After the taunts and chants, the showdown devolved into a roving game of cat and mouse as packs of political rivals crisscross bridges above the Willamette River, and police scrambled to keep them apart. Skirmishes, pepper spray, arrests on the city's east and west sides followed over a course of hours as crowd mostly counter-protesters roamed the streets. Demonstrators dressed in black, masking their face, hurled mayonnaise and smashed windows of at least one shuttle bus carrying the right-wing Proud Boys. Now, the Proud Boys had a very cozy relationship with the Portland members of the Portland Police Department, and of course they had shuttle buses moving them in and out of Portland. Police at one point declared a civil disturbance, yet the powder keg that elected officials and law enforcement feared could engulf the city and largely fizzled. We want national attention, and we got it. That was from Joe Biggs, a Florida resident and former InfoWorld staffer who organized a riot event, Mission Success. The Proud Boys described them as patriots and Western chauvinists. A number of their members are supportive of misogynistic, racist, and xenophobic sentiments, and they are prone to violence. Biggs has called upon like-minded people from around the nation to decry a recent attack in the city against a conservative writer, Andy Ingo. Participants also backed the U.S. Senate resolution to label Antifa as a domestic terrorist. That's sponsored by none other than Ted Line Cruz, and we'll just leave it on that. Some, including Biggs, had talked openly about the Portland event and the desire to exterminate. Now, this is, understand, exterminate Antifa. Who is using the word exterminate? That definitely sounds like a terrorist operation themselves. Other event supporters posted images on social media depicting graphic beatdowns and knives slicing the throats of enemies and corpses in body bags. Rose City Antifa, Portland's homegrown, morphed band of anti-fascist activists, called on supporters to turn out in opposition to demonstrations. Major consideration is being given to naming Antifa, and this is the right-wing propaganda and organization of terror. The president tweeted, this is DJ Trump, Portland is being watched and very closely. Hoping the mayor will be able to properly do his job. The mayor, Ted Wheeler, fired back at Trump in a CNN interview. This is a potentially a dangerous and violent situation, and Wheeler said, and adding that the noise do anything to support or help the efforts that are going on here in Portland. At the start of demonstrations, cement slabs and a line of police officers formed a barricade. This is the Morrison Bridge to separate the groups, the rival groups with the so-called Proud Boys. The right-wing activists, some wearing a body armor and helmet, burst into chants of USA, typical fascist type of chants. Counter demonstrations near Battleship Oregon Memorial Marina Park varied from local Jewish and Buddhist groups to marching bands. Some members of the rival group exchanged heated words, and officers kept them mostly distant. I don't know if this about 90 minutes, the showdown dispersed and people went on the move. The Proud Boys and their supporters began to march over Hawthorne Bridge, which had been closed early in the day. Police escorted group, and this is a typical pattern across the bridge and preventing counter demonstrations from following. It wasn't planned, it wasn't orchestrated, as Sergeant Brandon White, a spokesman for the Monmouth County Sheriff's Office. We had a request that they would like to lead the area, so we facilitate them. And this happens in city after city, that these police departments accommodate the right-wing agitators. The same thing happened in Berkeley. In the aftermath, police made arrests. Around town, 13 people involved there. Demonstrators often wandered into the streets, sometimes blocking traffic and chanting and beating drums. Police, who estimated more than 1,200 demonstrators altogether, said they were clamoring to continue to try to keep the opposing groups apart. And out of that, amazing, there were 700 law enforcement officers from 15 agencies. So in other words, the law enforcement officers almost outnumbered the demonstrators. Not unusual there. Darlene Outlaw said the Bureau achieved its 2 goals for the day, keeping people safe, and that is farcical, and allowing the public to exercise its free speech rights. Mayor Wheeler took aim at Biggs, claiming his efforts are costing the city millions of dollars, that in a national culture of fear caused by hate crimes and mass killings, Biggs is feeling a sense of unease. No doubt. The Proud Boys, meanwhile, issued a press statement saying they plan to return to Portland in a month unless the city does more to track down on the anti-fascists. This is just crazy. We built a very diverse coalition of people who turn out to say that hate is not welcome here. That's what Bynum said. And when the Proud Boys come back, there will even be more of us. So this is by Jim Ryan and various others of the Oregonian staff. David Killerman Kyle Williams, Mark Graves, etc. out there, and Brooke Herbert also contributed to the report. So this is from Portland. And in summary, these things that went national, of course international, when old DJ Trump himself becomes involved in these kinds of situations. From Reuters, we have basically the same story here. What happened in Portland is out there. 6 people had minor injuries, basically from chemical spray, wooden poles, knives, stun guns, etc. And this is all there. And a quote from the mayor and DJ Trump. This is a very interesting in that the city moves on this. Let's just jump around. This is from Reuters. Let me get it up here. Ex-campaign chief I mispronounce his name sometime. Corey Wadolinsky? I mispronounced it. Anyway, he used to be a campaign manager. Said he would be happy to testify before the House Judiciary Committee. The panel is considering whether to recommend impeachment of DJ Trump. Subpoenaed Ludwinski on Tuesday as a witness to an alleged attempt by the president to impede the work of the special counsel. Now a citizen said he looks forward to testifying as a guy who is going to fight back against claims of wrongdoing. He calls them democratic claims. I'm an open book. I want to go and remind the American people that these guys are on a witch hunt. So this is basically it. He's contemplating a run for Senate next year, and said he could make a final decision in October. Not sure what state he's working in here. Both Dearborn and Lewinsky played. Rick Dearborn is there. He's former deputy chief of staff in the Mueller final report. This was with the Washington Post. We were just reporting there. And we'll look at some of the questions here. As mass shooting rise, experts say high-capacity magazines should be the focus. There's no doubt about that. That is just a headline. We agree on that issue. Is dealing with high-capacity magazines, that is. And there are a number of opinion articles out here. I looked at some. There's one here by Hewitt, how the Navy could be torpedoing Trump's chances in 2020. Well, what this character is proposing is that shipbuilding yards, of course, in Philadelphia, very famous there, and in Michigan and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, also that they build more ships, and that would employ more people to the Trump cause, a manipulation of the economy there in case rough times come, and they are no doubt coming. Now this is we'll have this in the future. E.J. Dionne has another one out here. Real change after 2020 depends on who controls the Senate. I would agree with E.J. on that particular one. And let's move along here. Now, this was a famous speech that old DJ Trump gave at a Shell refinery here last week. Shell plant drew thousands of workers. They were paid overtime to be there. Now, this is one of the situations that happened very contrived. This is workers at Royal Dutch Shell plant, Monatka, Pennsylvania, were forced to choose Tuesday between attending a speech by Trump or foregoing overtime pay that their co-workers would earn. Attendance was optional, but contract workers who chose not to stand in a crowd would not qualify for time and a half pay as they arrived at work. This is from the Pittsburgh Gazette. Several companies with thousands of unionized workers have contracts with Shell, one of the largest oil and gas companies. Workers at the unfinished Pennsylvania petrochemical complex arrived at 7 a.m., scanned their IDs, and stood for hours until Trump gave a speech. No scan, no pay, a supervisor of one of the contractors wrote to workers. Contractor's memo also banned yelling or protesting or anyone being viewed as resistant to Trump. An underlying theme of the event is to promote goodwill from the union, the document said, according to the Post-Gazette. Your building trade leaders and job stewards have agreed to this. Trump has a long history of false claim that liberal demonstrators have been paid to protest when anger covers floods the streets. And when protests bubbled up in the airport in 2017 in response to immigration ban from several Muslim-majority countries, he alleged that demonstrators were professional anarchists, thugs, and paid protesters. Well, these people no doubt were paid about 5,000, and that figure has been given as many as 10,000. About 5,000 workers attended the speech, that's according to Newsweek magazine. Shell spokesman told the Post-Courier that workers at the plant, now this is very interesting here, have a 56-hour work week, which includes 16 hours of overtime. So workers who showed up on Tuesday were paid for the week at a higher rate, no doubt. Another spokesman, Chris Smith, told Newsweek that workers who chose to skip the event received paid time off, which didn't count as worked hours. So in other words, they turned it as a work day. We do this several times a year with various speakers, Smith told him. The morning session includes safety training and other related activities. The business manager for the union, Steam Fitters Local 449, told the Courier his workers respected Trump for his title, regardless of whether they liked or disliked him. We've heard that speech before. Anyone who did not want to go to work that day could skip the speech. This is from Broadbent, Ken Broadbent. This is just what Shell wanted to do, and we went along with it, no doubt. Go along to get along, I guess, is the deal right there. It tells you there, well, now we know it. And this is something that probably would not have happened 10 or 20 years ago that we would have had this. Let's just say a little bit about the recession here. I'll just read the headline. American consumers are holding up the global economy, but for how long? The question is asked here. This is by Rachel Siegel. And, of course, Heather Long. I always see Heather Long at the news conferences of Lawrence Powell. American consumers increasingly propping up the global economy, an enduring source of strength that is keeps helping the U.S. keeping the U.S. out of recession and drawing sharp contrast to the rest of the world. But as a number of signs point to a possible downturn, economists are growing more skeptical that consumers will continue to open up their wallets. I'll not read all of this, but just enough of it. The single one-day, this is all on numbers, man. We talked about this, the bond market, etc. The consumer is playing Atlas, shouldering the economy, said Diane Swak, chief economist at Grant Thornton. Anyway, there's an underlying fatality here. Businesses have already been scared into pulling back. Now consumers are walking on eggshells. No single bit of negative news is likely to dramatically change consumers' outlook, who about 70% of them driving the economy. One of the more reliable word arrived on it, and this is we missed this. We put it in arrived Friday when Michigan's consumer confidence index fell to a 7-month low, and we'll have to get that in another one of our reports. Sometimes you don't get everything, and this is one of the things happening here chronologically. The information is not dated because consumer confidence out of Michigan is one of those things that continues to go. A growing sense of anxiety around recessions is enough to unsettle consumers. That's Mark Cohen. He's at the Columbia Business School. One illustration here: if consumers are spending, say, $10 or more, that seems like a small part. At a grocery store checkout, people will start to scale back. We'll see. We'll get some information on that particular situation and get back to it. Let me just we'll get to Charlie Cook, but let's do the ball scores first. Lee here, hopefully. Nonetheless, the Red Sox 13-7 over the Orioles. This was last night, and Cleveland 8-4 over the Yankees. Padres 3-2 over the Phillies. The Mariners 7 shut out the Blue Jays in Toronto. The Rays in Florida 5-4 over the Tigers. The Cardinals in Cincy 5-4 over the Reds. And in Atlanta, the Atlanta 5-3 over the Dodgers, who've been driving on there. And the Nationals had a slugfest in D.C. 16-8 over the Brewers of Milwaukee. The Mets keep rolling on. Pete Alonso hit his 40th home run to beat the National League rookie list record. And that was 11-5 over Kansas City in Kansas City. The Twins 6-3 in Texas over the Rangers, and in 10 the Marlins and Rockies in Denver. It was 7-6 game there. The Angels 9-2 over the White Sox out in California, and the Astros 4-1 over Oakland in Oakland. Zach Cranky, for his 7th. Smooth inning for his 200th win there, pitching for first place. Houston, they now have Zach Crackett. They'll get ready for the series, the World Series, that is. The D-backs 6-1 over the Giants. Wilmer Flores there, etc. And finally, the Cubbies were in Pittsburgh. 7-1 was the score of Cubbies. So that is the baseball part. And let's quickly get to Charlie Cook, and we'll take a look at Mr. Cook here and Amy Walters. And incidentally, one of the things we are going to make a concerted effort to do is we'll have less emphasis on Iowa and New Hampshire going on here. We already reported the divestiture movement here and that news conference coming up out in Minnesota that'll have Ihan Omar and Rashina Tlaib of Detroit. They will be giving their news conference over that recent situation there, and some other people involved in it. And we'll go to, let me see, who will we start with? These are Cook Report people. Well, we will do an Iowa story here, I suppose. Iowa, Amy Klobuchar looks for room to grow. This is from the Star Tribune in Minnesota. This is the state in its first nation primary here. Let me just a second here. Get this up. Carroll, Iowa, this deep red county of western Iowa, where President Trump won by 30 points. Amy Klobuchar stopped at a crowded cafe recently to stress that she can talk about issues like guns and immigration in practical common sense terms that should appeal to voters in the Midwest. I have won in Republican districts a lot, and again and again and again. With 6 months ahead in Iowa's first-in-nation caucuses, the centralist message of electability at the heart of Klobuchar's long-shot campaign has yet to pay off in the polls, adding urgency to her plea to Democratic base that has lunged to the left. Now they say markedly to the left. That is not factual. Anyway, when with ground to make up and days of summer growing shorter, Klobuchar plans path to nomination is dotted with Iowa road signs. Every town, every stop, a long game to outlast a field of bigger-name candidates. Over 4 days in early August, and in the state critical to presidential hope, no doubt, has courted Iowa Democrats in cafes, private homes, union halls, farms, at fundraisers, dinners, and period there. And I think it is very important in Iowa to have a candidate from the Midwest. That's what she said at the state fair. She spoke at the soapbox that was at the Iowa State Fair, is always there. And some of the front runners, second stringers, and also Rands also worked the fair, and that's not good for Amy at all. I know maybe I haven't had a viral moment, all right, as she said, as a visit to the fair. Following her trail, it's not hard to find Democratic caucus goers who view the Minnesota senator favorably. Many remain undecided and isn't often the first choice of those who make a pick. Supporters of Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden weren't easy to find. Needing a strong finish there, Klobuchar's campaign has 40 paid workers in Iowa. I think she has a potential surprise here. That's from David Nagley, a former Democratic type from Waterloo, Iowa. Anyway, some people see her between a 6th and 8th place now, and will that be enough? We at our Ouija board, it's Crest Analytics Ouija board, we see her finishing much better than 6 or 8th place there. We see her perhaps as high as 4 or 5. Where do we take that to? Oh well, we'll take it somewhere. We'll see. Those things can change, no doubt about that. And we'll see. Now we'll go to Mr. Cook here and Amy Walter, and we'll make sure we got the right dates on everything here. A recession and the fight. This is on the 16th for the Democratic nomination. The possibility of a global slowdown or U.S. recession has lots of people speculating what it would mean for DJ Trump. This is Amy Walter writing here, I should say. My colleague Charlie Cook isn't so sure that this would happen. He suggests that our growing partisanship over the last few years, Democrats and Republicans stick by their parties no matter the political, economic, social environment, limits how much a good economy can help or a bad economy can hurt. While the focus thus far has been on what an economic downturn would mean for next November, I'm curious about how it would affect the fight for Democratic nomination at a time of economic uncertainty and turmoil, with Democratic voters attracted to candidates like Liz Warren, Bernie Sanders, who argue for big fundamental changes to economic institutions, or old Joe Biden. Well, interesting there. To help me think through it, I reached out to some smart Democratic strategists I know, none of whom are currently working for the presidential candidates. That's kind of interesting. So, setting out whatever it is, setting out. Seeing affirmative an affirmation for a case for big change, but a large contingent of primary voters may find the approach ill-timed, ill-advised, and too risky. One-time, long-time consultant said, naturally would say that plays to Biden's more modest incremental approach, plus a dose of primary voter logic. Hey, Obama steered us calmly through the last recession, actually through the last depression. It's not long ago, but in 1992, Clinton exploited the Bush recession and anemic economy with a big theme, putting people first, but with mostly incremental job proposals, job training. Job training has been frowned upon since that date. The political trick in a recession is to meet voters where they are on the plane and lay the blame with the incumbent. Warren is one to say large forces are blamed, while Biden is far more apt to argue it's Trump's fault. Well, it's interesting here. We'll get to that in a minute here. get ahead of ourselves too much. Warren says one strategist makes her signature issue much a big deal, which is good news for her. In times of recession, the public rarely have a mental space for any other issue. It gives her much a larger platform. Biden, meanwhile, can claim that the mantle of helping pull America out of the depression. However, Warren, the strategist, a weak economy will greatly weaken Trump, which means that current marginal Democratic candidates will poll ahead of him in the general election matchups. That's already happened. Thus, she conduct groundbreaking work on personal bankruptcies. No doubt about that. She's had been a bankruptcy lawyer. Biden, of course, can point to his tenure as vice president, etc. Well, as far as Osama bin Laden, I remember Jerry and I covered that. People have forgotten about it. And this is where it ends up. While both have a significant experience in dealing with financial crisis, there's been they have very different approaches, no doubt about this. And it's interesting that Amy Walter focused here on Joe Lunchbox Biden and not Bernie. Incidentally, Bernie came out with his social justice plan around cash bail. Very important situation. Now with these candidates focusing on South Carolina. Now, this is Charlie Cook writing here with a third lane candidate emerge. After driving 500 miles around Iowa in 3 days this past week, listening to almost 20 candidates, two strong impressions I received were just how fragile Joe Biden's front running status is and how Elizabeth Warren's ascendancy continues to be underestimated. Granted, you didn't need to drive around Iowa to get that impression, but it still came through. Democratic voters' level of affection for the affordable Biden and the goodwill he earned during President Barack Obama's thing as a wingman for 8 years are not to be dismissed, nor his experience and knowledge he's given in 36 years in the Senate. No one dismissed that. But all these strengths and $5 will get him a cup of coffee at Starbucks, and what makes and keeps him the front runner for Democratic nomination is the perception that he is electable in 2020 for a sizable constituency in the Democratic Party who view nothing as more important than defeating DJ Trump. His center-left positions make it hard to pigeonhole him as as the guy. The tough to hate and even dislike the guy. I see. While not terribly excited, the left to center positions make it hard to pigeonhole him as an outside political mainstream guy. I'm finally get to. He relates well to the European working class, particularly those in industrial states. Well, he's from Pennsylvania. Why would he not relate there? Sorry about that. My teleprompter is run by Pointer. The question is that the aurora of electability stand up. How it will stand up if Biden continues to experience lapses. Well, the lapses this year in 2019 are not as important as in 2020. Half dozen other candidates, a group left to center, have dominated the news. And Bennett, I would discard him. Bullock, forget about him. Christian Gillibrand, somewhat Hickenlooper has looped out of the campaign. Amy Klobuchar is still there. So amongst the so-called center-left candidates, the only one really is viable at this point is Amy Klobuchar. All are quite capable. Few swing voters will find them offensive, but they all have waited in vain for so long to see if Biden collapses. He occupies the high ground. At the other end, in the progressive lane, you find Bernie Sanders, and it's interesting, and Charlie Cook names Bernie and Liz Warren. My sense before heading out to Iowa is that Warren was gradually eclipsing Sanders, but I'm not prepared to see just how quickly that will happen. Sanders has a strong core that will never abandon him. There's no doubt about that. But the second and third centric circles of intensity and enthusiasm of him are fleeing to Warren. To listen to Warren is not to be overwhelmed by Harvard liberalism. It's much more of a pure populist message by one articulated in a very intelligent fashion on the stump at a town hall meeting in Fort Dodge. Her warm-up music was Dolly Parton's anthem to working class person, 9 to 5. Remember that. She should be touring with Dolly Parton. Her personal narrative, growing up poor in Oklahoma, grapes of wrath situation weaved into her message. And when she vows to attack political corruption head on, that's always very good. Her speech is more refined. Huey Long, out of Charlie Cook's native Louisiana. He'd know about Huey Long. And a rehash of Michael Terwell. Professor Dukakis was Professor Dukakis. In terms of scope, with all what Warren is proposing, it makes Roosevelt's New Deal seem modest by comparison. Well, it's a different time. For those Democrats who've long been frustrated by moderation implementation, will find none of that in Warren. Go big, go home. The big question is whether this ends with a two-person race between Biden, center-left for Biden, and progressives like Warren, whether it will be a third lane featuring Ann. Well, Kamala Harris is out there. Kamala Harris has California. She'll do reasonably well, I think, in South Carolina. Buttigieg, you can count him out. Cory Booker, well, so. And Beto O'Rourke. Well, Beto could come out there. Beto is a very good speaker. He is the best speaker amongst this group of characters. But he's just not taken off. He's crowded out too much. O'Rourke seems to have the hot hand first, coming off his impressive run, of course, in Texas. Buttigieg projects an intellect and ability to explain layman terms. Well, he's a fake. Part of what seems to plague Buttigieg is the question whether a gay candidate can actually win, a sentiment shared by even many who are passionate supporters of LGBT issues. I think it's more his politics than whether or not he's gay or not gay. There's obviously some people out there that are thinking about that. Harris has passion but not really compelling message or agenda, and has stumbled on healthcare. Booker combines his moral authority, passion, and effective campaign. He's a retail campaign person, but for some reason he hasn't caught on yet. Doesn't mean he can't catch on. A long time to go. There's no guarantee that a candidate in the middle, hybrid column, makes it to the finals. Indeed, a candidate who has to elbow their way into a slot. But in misgivings about Biden and Warren's Virginia continue to grow, there could be room for one of these. Well, Charlie Cook has always been a moderate type person, and he'd like to see one of these. Will it happen this year? Not at the present time as we roll along. This will do it for the Monday Morning Quarterback. This is Boston Red and the Jared Pippin broadcast booth. We're working now on a number of things. An open source report we'll get out here, and also the podcasting report. We just want to get some more statistics to nail that down. Good day.